Okay, let's unpack this. You've brought us a stack of sources centered around a book that's, well, it's practically a cultural phenomenon. The Seven Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey.
Absolutely. I mean, since it came out in '89, it sold, what, over 20 million copies, became the first nonfiction audiobook to hit a million sales in the U.S., and Covey himself, hugely influential figure.
Right. And the core promise, it's all about personal effectiveness, professional effectiveness, but with this specific angle, right? Not just quick tips.
No, exactly. It champions this inside-out approach.
Mhm.
The idea is to guide you from dependence to independence and then
Yeah.
ultimately to interdependence.
Built on what he calls timeless, universal principles.
That's the foundation.
Now, chances are you listening right now, you've definitely heard of this book. Maybe you've read it, maybe it's been recommended, or you're just kind of curious why it seems to be everywhere. But here's where our deep dive gets really interesting, because for every story you hear, like that Reddit user's father finding it life-changing, there's also a surprising amount of pretty sharp criticism online.
That's exactly what the sources show.
Mm.
You look at forums, review sites like Goodreads,
Hmm.
people saying it's obvious, it's repetitive, maybe hard to get through.
Or even like kind of negative views, seeing it as corporate jargon or something.
Yeah. So the question becomes, how does a book manage to be seen as totally transformative by millions?
And dismissed as boring or even problematic by others. Why such a split?
It really raises fascinating questions, doesn't it, about how we receive ideas about personal change. Is it the message itself, the delivery,
Mm.
the context you read it in?
Right. And that's our mission here. We're going to dive into these sources you've gathered, pull out the core ideas, the essentials from the book, and also the key points from these contrasting reactions.
We want to figure out what's actually in the Seven Habits.
Explore why it connects so deeply with some people.
Understand the perspectives of those who critique it.
And most importantly, clarify what you can take away from all this information.
Okay, so let's start with the foundation. Who was Stephen Covey?
Good place to start.
Well, he was an educator, author, businessman. Pretty strong academic background. Harvard MBA, doctorate from BYU. Very influential through his company, Franklin Covey.
And the sources mention influences on him, like Drucker, Carl Rogers.
Yeah, those thinkers, plus his own study of, like, historical self-help literature. And one source also points to his LDS background, suggesting the book kind of translates some of those values into a more secular framework. He passed away back in 2012 from complications after a bike accident.
And a core idea he pushes back against is the personality ethic.
Right, he saw a lot of modern self-help focusing on, the surface stuff,
Yeah.
image, techniques, positive thinking, things he saw as superficial quick fixes.
Polishing the outside without dealing with the inside.
Exactly. He contrasts that with the character ethic. He argued earlier success literature focused more on things like integrity, humility, fidelity, justice, patience.
These deeper foundational principles.
That's the idea.
Okay, so principles versus values. The sources make this distinction. Principles are presented as external, like natural laws, fairness, service, that kind of thing. Universal, with predictable consequences.
Whereas values are internal, subjective, they guide your behavior. But for true effectiveness, Covey argues, your values need to align with these external principles.
Got it. And woven into this is the concept of paradigms.
Hugely important. Paradigms are our mental maps, the lenses we see the world through. Covey's point is our paradigms shape absolutely everything, our attitudes, our behaviors, how we interact.
He says the way we see the problem is a problem.
That's the famous line. Which means significant change often requires a fundamental shift in how you see things, a paradigm shift.
And that's the heart of the inside-out approach.
Precisely. The whole book is built on this. Real, lasting change starts from within your character, your paradigms, and then it works its way outward, not just changing surface behaviors.
Okay. And the seven habits themselves, they build sequentially.
Yeah, there's a structure. Habits 1, 2, and 3 are about mastering yourself. That's the private victory, moving from dependence to true independence.
Right. Getting your own house in order first.
Exactly. And once you've got that independence, you build on it with habits 4, 5, and 6. That's the public victory, shifting from independence to effective interdependence with others.
And habit 7 kind of holds it all together, renewal.
Yeah, keeps the whole cycle going. There's also this concept, the PPC balance.
PPC.
P is production getting the results you want. PC is production capability, maintaining or enhancing the asset, the ability that produces those results.
Like the goose and the golden eggs fable. P is the egg, PC is the goose.
Exactly like that. You got to take care of the goose production capability if you want those golden eggs long term. Effectiveness requires balancing both.
Okay, that sets the stage really well. Let's dive into those first 3 habits then. The private victory, that journey to self-mastery.
All right. Habit 1, be proactive. The core idea here is pretty profound, actually. It's about the fundamental human freedom to choose your response in any situation. Responsibility.
So it's not just about reacting automatically to things that happen, you consciously choose how you'll respond.
Yes. And Covey says this ability comes from our unique human endowments. We have self-awareness, we can think about our own thoughts. Imagination, we can envision possibilities. Conscience, our sense of right and wrong. And independent will the power to act based on our choices, not just impulses.
So these endowments allow us to act based on our values rather than just being driven by circumstances or feelings.
That's the idea. Proactive people subordinate impulses to values. Reactive people, on the other hand, feel driven by their circumstances, by how people treat them, by, the weather.
So the key point isn't necessarily what happens to you,
But your chosen response to it. That's where your power lies. Difficult situations can even become opportunities to build character through that chosen response.
and you practice this in everyday stuff, the little things.
Yeah, it's about controlling situations from the inside out, focusing on your own response, your inner condition, rather than trying to control external conditions first.
But the sources also highlight you choose your actions, but not the consequences, right? Those are governed by principles, by natural law.
Absolutely. Covey emphasizes that. You step in front of a train. The consequence is governed by physics, not your positive attitude about stepping there. Principles determine consequences.
Okay. Now here's where one of our sources, a Reddit comment, brings up something specific from this chapter.
Nice.
They point out Covey discussing his opposition to labor legislation. He apparently argued he treated his employees well, so he resented organizing efforts.
Right. And the source presenting this critique sees it as problematic. Their view is that it potentially ignores the inherent power imbalance between, employers and employees.
And the critique suggests it might reflect a certain political viewpoint, maybe benefiting those already in power.
That's the perspective offered by that source, yeah. They frame it as potentially masking systemic issues by focusing solely on individual choice and the employer's goodwill. It's presented as one specific example where the book's message, according to this source, feels potentially biased.
So the principle is choose your response. But the critique focuses on how a specific example used to illustrate it, the labor one, could be seen as overlooking bigger societal factors, or maybe reflecting a particular leaning. It's just one source's take on that application.
It definitely highlights how these seemingly universal principles can get tangled up with specific, sometimes controversial examples or viewpoints when applied to the real world.
Okay, let's move on. Habit 2. Begin with the end in mind.
Right. This one's all about having a clear vision, knowing where you're ultimately going, who you want to be, what you want to achieve, and using that vision as the filter for everything you do now.
Like making sure the ladder you're climbing is leaning against the right wall.
Exactly. Before you start climbing like crazy, it's the difference between being busy and being effective, between management doing things right and leadership doing the right things.
Because you could be super efficient at tasks that ultimately don't matter for your big picture.
Precisely. The core principle here is that everything is created twice. First, there's a mental creation, a blueprint. Then there's the physical creation.
And Covey says you should take charge of that first, mental creation.
Yeah. Consciously design your life. Write your own script, basically, instead of just reacting to circumstances or letting other people's agendas dictate your life.
And the main tool for this is writing a personal mission statement.
That's the key tool he suggests. It should articulate, your desired character, what you want to be, your contributions and achievements, what you want to do, and the core values or principles that guide you. It's like your personal constitution.
Sounds like it requires some serious thinking.
It does. Introspection. Covey even suggests using both sides of the brain logic for writing it, but also the intuitive, visual side. Maybe visualizing your own funeral or a big anniversary to get perspective on what really matters.
And affirmations come in here too, based on the mission statement.
Yeah, using that mission statement to craft personal, positive, present tense, visual, emotional affirmations. Kind of like how athletes visualize success.
And the point is, centering your life on these unchanging principles gives you stability, frees you from being swayed by external stuff.
That's the argument. It provides wisdom and guidance independent of immediate circumstances or others' opinions.
Okay, which leads logically to habit 3.
Yep.
Put first things first. This is where the vision meets reality, right?
Yeah,
Daily action.
exactly. This is Covey's famous take on time management. It's about managing your life and time based on importance, not just urgency. It's all about quadrant 2.
Ah, the 4 quadrants. Can you refresh us quickly?
Sure. Quadrant 1 is urgent and important. Crises, deadlines, pressing problems.
The stuff that screams for attention.
Right. Quadrant 3 is urgent, but not important. Interruptions, some meetings, popular activities that don't really contribute.
Busy work, awesome.
Yeah. And quadrant 4 is not urgent and not important. Trivia, time wasters, some pleasant activities done to excess.
Okay, so Q1, Q3, Q4. What's left is Q2.
Quadrant 2, that's the sweet spot. Not urgent, but important. This is where you do prevention, planning, relationship building, recognizing new opportunities, learning, recreation, things that build long-term capability but don't usually demand immediate attention.
So the goal is to spend most of your time in Q2, to proactively prevent Q1 crises.
That's exactly it. Be opportunity-minded, think preventatively, live in Q2 as much as possible.
Which means you have to learn to say no.
Definitely. Saying no to quadrant 3 and 4 activities. Using your mission statement from Habit 2 as your guide for what truly matters. How you actually spend your time reveals your real priorities, not just what you say they are.
The sources mention criteria for good Q2 management, coherence with your mission, balance across roles.
Right. Q2, focus scheduling your priorities, not just prioritizing your schedule, plus the people dimension, flexibility, portability.
And the practical steps involve identifying roles, setting weekly goals for each role based on your mission.
Scheduling time for those Q2 goals, and then adapting daily. It's about making that conscious link between your day-to-day actions and your deepest values and purposes.
So management is doing things right, habit 3, but it only works if leadership is doing the right things, habit 2.
Precisely. They work together. As Goethe apparently said, things which matter most must never be at the mercy of things which matter least.
Okay, so that wraps the private victory. Achieving independence, self-mastery through habits 1, 2, and 3. You need that solid foundation first.
Right. Because effective interdependence, the public victory, is presented as a choice that only truly independent people can make. You can't build strong relationships or collaborate effectively if you're still dependent or haven't mastered yourself.
And fundamentally, what you are matters most in relationships.
Yeah, your character speaks louder than your techniques, which leads right into the emotional bank account analogy.
That's a really memorable one.
It is. It's a simple metaphor for the level of trust in a relationship. You make deposits through courtesy, kindness, honesty, keeping commitments. That builds the balance, the trust.
And withdrawals are things like breaking promises, disrespect, being dismissive.
Right. They deplete the trust. A high balance gives you a buffer. You can make mistakes. Communication is easier. A low balance makes everything tense, fragile.
So making deposits means really understanding the other person, what they value as a deposit.
Yeah, it's individual.
Yeah.
Plus, attending to the little things, keeping commitments is huge. Clarifying expectations up front to avoid misunderstandings.
And showing personal integrity. That's fundamental for trust. Being loyal, keeping promises.
And apologizing sincerely when you inevitably make a withdrawal. That takes strength, but it's a major deposit.
Okay, on to habit 4. Think win-win. This is about seeking mutual benefit.
Exactly. Finding solutions where everyone feels good about the outcome and is genuinely committed to the plan. It's a frame of mind, a paradigm for interaction.
And Covey contrasts this with other paradigms, win-lose, lose-win.
Right. Win-lose is competitive. If I win, you lose. Lose-win is being a doormat. Go ahead, have your way. Lose-lose happens when two win-lose people interact, mutually destructive. And just win is thinking only of yourself.
And he suggests win, win or no deal as often the best initial approach.
Yeah, agreeing up front that if you can't find a solution that truly benefits both parties, you'll agree to disagree agreeably and not proceed with that particular deal or decision. It gives you freedom from having to force a subpar outcome.
The sources talk about 5 dimensions needed for win-win, starting with character.
Yes, requires integrity, maturity, which he defines as the balance between courage, speaking your mind, and consideration, respecting others' views, and crucially, an abundance mentality.
Believing there's enough success and happiness for everyone, versus a scarcity mentality where life is a zero-sum game.
Exactly. Then the second dimension is relationships. You need that high emotional bank account balance, that trust, focusing on issues, not personalities. Third is agreements, clearly defining desired results, guidelines, resources, accountability, consequences.
So everyone knows what's expected.
Right. Fourth is systems. Organizational structures, training, compensation, etc., need to support win-win, not reward win-lose behavior. And fifth is the process itself, how you actually arrive at a win-win solution. That links into habits 5 and 6.
Okay, let's go there. Habit 5. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. Sounds like it's all about listening.
Deep listening. Empathetic listen. It's diagnosing before you prescribe.
Because the common tendency is what?
To listen with the intent to reply. We filter everything through our own experiences, our own autobiography. We're formulating our response while the other person is still talking.
So we're not really hearing them. We're hearing how their words fit our story or preparing our rebuttal.
Pretty much. Empathetic listening means truly focusing on the other person. Listening for feeling, for meaning, paying attention to body language, trying to see the world through their eyes. It actually takes a lot of inner security to be open to being influenced like that.
Like a good doctor diagnoses before treating, or a lawyer gathers facts before arguing.
Exactly. Good judgment comes after understanding. Judging first shuts down understanding. When people feel genuinely heard, they open up, they become less defensive, problem solving becomes possible.
It takes time up front, maybe.
It can, but Covey argues it saves huge amounts of time later by preventing misunderstandings, solving the real problems, and building the relationship. Then, after you've truly understood, you work on being understood. This part takes courage.
Balancing the consideration of listening with the courage to state your own view.
Right. And the sources mention the Greek concepts: ethos, your credibility character, the EBA; kathos, connecting on an emotional level, understanding their feelings; and logos, the logic, the reasoning.
And the effective sequence is ethos, then pathos, then logos.
That's what Covey argues. Most people jump straight to logos, the logic, without establishing credibility or emotional connection first.
When you do seek to be understood, you need to present clearly, specifically, maybe visually.
And connect it to the other person's concerns based on the understanding you gained.
Now, circling back to critiques, there was a specific anecdote mentioned in the sources about this habit involving Covey and his son.
Ah, yes. The story where the father changes his listening approach, really tries to understand the son, and apparently the son's behavioral issues just resolve.
And the critique from a Reddit user was that this felt overly simplistic, potentially misleading.
Yeah, their point was that real complex family problems usually don't have such neat, immediate fixes just from one change in communication. Presenting it that way, the critique argues, might make others feel like failures if they try it and don't get miracle results.
So it's seen by that source as maybe a cherry-picked anecdote that perfectly illustrates the principle, but doesn't reflect the typical messiness of applying these things.
That's the gist of the critique. It raises that tension between using a clean example to teach a principle and representing the often complex reality of implementation. It felt too neat, perhaps, for that particular reviewer.
Okay. Let's move to the next one. Habit 6. Synergize. This sounds like the culmination of the public habits.
It really is. It's about creative cooperation. The core idea is that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. 1 + 1 = 3, or 10, or 100.
So it's not just compromise where 1 + 1 might equal 1.5. It's creating something new and better.
Exactly. It's about interacting in a way that leads to insights, solutions, outcomes that no single person could have come up with alone. Unexpected discoveries, Covey calls it.
And it requires the previous habits, high trust, win-win thinking.
Absolutely. It's presented as a test of the others. The level of trust, the emotional bank account, really determines the potential. Low trust leads to defensive, protective communication, maybe legalistic solutions. Medium trust might get you polite compromise. But high trust, combined with seeking understanding and thinking win-win, opens the door to synergy.
And a key ingredient is valuing differences.
Huge. Synergy thrives on differences, different perspectives, experiences, thinking styles. Instead of seeing difference as a threat, you see it as an opportunity. As the saying goes, if two people have the same opinion, one is unnecessary.
So you leverage those differences to create something better than either individual view.
Right. It can be applied to problem solving, brainstorming, overcoming resistance. It builds on everything that came before.
Which brings us to the final habit, habit 7, sharpen the saw. The renewal habit.
Yeah, this is crucial for sustainability. It's about regularly investing in yourself, maintaining and enhancing your production capability, the saw itself. The story is the woodcutter too busy sawing to stop and sharpen his dull saw.
You get diminishing returns if you don't maintain the tool, and this renewal happens across 4 dimensions.
Correct. The physical dimension.
Mm-hmm.
Exercise, nutrition, stress management, taking care of your body.
The spiritual dimension.
Yeah.
Connecting with your core values. your purpose, your mission statement from habit 2, renewing that sense of meaning.
The mental dimension. Continuous learning, reading, writing, planning, visualizing, keeping your mind active and growing.
And the social-emotional dimension. This is renewed primarily through practicing the relationship habits H4, H5, H6, building connection, making deposits, seeking mutual benefit. It's also about developing intrinsic security.
Okay, so physical renewal, maybe 30 months of exercise, is presented as a key Q2 activity. Requires proactivity.
Definitely. It pays huge dividends in energy, resilience, even self-image, but it's easy to neglect because it's not usually urgent.
Spiritual renewal links back to habit 2, keeping that end in mind clear and alive. How you do it is personal. Could be meditation, nature, music, prayer.
Right, but it requires consciously setting aside time. It's about recommitting to your purpose.
Mental renewal is about lifelong learning, not just formal education, but actively engaging your mind.
Yeah, reading broadly, exposing yourself to new ideas, writing, organizing. Avoiding mental stagnation. Also, a Q2 activity requires saying no to mind-numbing distractions. And social-emotional renewal comes through those positive interactions based on win-win, understanding, synergy, and building that inner security so you're not dependent on others' opinions.
Right. Finding peace through integrity, living by principles, maybe through service to others.
And the sources stress these 4 dimensions are interconnected. Neglecting one impacts the others.
Absolutely. Balanced renewal is synergistic. Improving your physical health gives you more mental energy. Clarifying your spiritual core helps guide your social interactions. They all reinforce each other.
Covey calls this an upward spiral of growth. Learn, commit, do.
Yes. You keep cycling through understanding, committing, and acting, but hopefully on progressively higher levels of effectiveness.
And he suggests a daily private victory, like an hour a day dedicated to renewing the physical, spiritual, and mental dimensions.
As a foundation for everything else, for developing all the habits and achieving those daily public victories in your interactions.
There are some powerful quotes linked to this. Gandhi on self-respect.
They cannot take away our self-respect if we do not give it to them. It comes from within.
And Emerson on persistence.
That which we persist in doing becomes easier, not that the nature of the task has changed, but our ability to do has increased. Renewal builds capacity.
Okay, so we've really walked through the whole framework. The shift from personality to character ethic, principles, paradigms, inside out. Then the private victory, H13, proactive, end in mind, first things first. The public victory, H4 to 6, win-win, understand first, synergize. And finally, renewal, H7, sharpen the saw.
And we touched on some specific critiques along the way, like the labor example or the sun anecdote. Should we pull the other critiques together now?
Yeah, let's consolidate those broader criticisms that came up in the sources. Beyond those specific points, what else did people take issue with?
Well, a common one was the feeling that many of the core ideas are perhaps kind of obvious, common sense, maybe, but presented in a very dense, sometimes academic feeling style that fills a lot of pages.
The sense that it's repetitive, or the anecdotes feel a bit too perfect, maybe illustrating confirmation bias?
Exactly. That the stories sometimes seem chosen specifically because they perfectly fit the principle, rather than showing the real messiness or complexity.
Some found the writing style itself just dry or maybe dated, mentioning things like left-right brain theory that are viewed differently now.
Right. There's also the critique about the underlying goal. Despite the focus on principles and character, some felt the book implicitly still seems geared towards achieving, conventional material success.
And expanding on the labor example point, the perspective from some sources that the book contains views or examples that might subtly or not so subtly favor a specific class or political viewpoint. Feeling like corporate messaging or even right-wing propaganda to some readers, especially if it was like required reading at work.
Yeah, that feeling of potential indoctrination came up. And finally, the very practical critique. Just following these steps isn't a magic bullet. Life involves luck, external factors. The book can't just override reality. Success isn't guaranteed.
Okay, so there are definitely some recurring, significant critiques highlighted in the sources, but they also offer counterpoints or nuances, right?
Absolutely. Many acknowledge that whether the book clicks for you is pretty subjective. What one person finds profound, another finds obvious.
And there's value in understanding these different takes, especially for such an influential book.
Sure. Some argue the book's depth isn't a flaw. It offers serious concepts that do require time and effort, which might contrast with our modern desire for quick fixes.
Others point to the real value it provides in creating a shared language or framework, especially in organizations or teams, even families.
Right. And despite all the critiques of style or specific examples, you can't ignore the sheer number of people who genuinely report finding the core principles incredibly helpful and transformative in their own lives.
So, putting it all together for you listening, what's the big takeaway from this deep dive? Our aim was to give you that quick but thorough understanding.
You've got the core structure now, dependence to independence to interdependence. You've heard the 7 habits themselves. You understand the foundation's paradigms, inside out, PPC balance.
And crucially, you've also heard the range of reactions, the strong praise, and the pointed critiques from the sources we looked at.
So instead of feeling like you have to accept it as gospel or reject it entirely, maybe view it as a comprehensive framework, a set of interconnected principles for thinking about effectiveness, grounded in that inside-out philosophy.
And you can use the critiques we discussed as lenses. Ask yourself, do these points about density or repetition resonate? Do the examples feel dated or maybe biased, as some sources suggest?
Can you separate the underlying principle, the potential tool for thinking, from the specific way Covey presented it, or from an anecdote that might feel simplistic or problematic to you?
Ultimately, as some sources suggested, the value might be selective. Maybe you gain a useful perspective. Maybe 1 or 2 habits really resonate and you adopt those. Maybe it's just helpful to understand the language if people around you use it.
It's about critically engaging with it, taking what's useful to you, with awareness of both its potential strengths and the criticisms leveled against it.
We've explored Covey's central idea. True effectiveness starts inside out, built on timeless principles. Yet the reactions show that the packaging matters. How ideas are presented, the examples chosen, your own context. It all shapes how the message lands.
Which leaves us with a final thought to consider. How much does the packaging matter when the core principles are presented as fundamental truths? Does a dated analogy or a perceived bias in an example undermine the core idea itself?
Or can those underlying principles, things like integrity, vision, prioritizing, understanding, stand on their own, regardless of how they were delivered decades ago, or the specific illustrations used?
Something for you to mull over as you reflect on this deep dive and decide what, if anything, from the 7 habits might be effective for you.
Reflect on what stood out to you most. Thanks for joining us.